So I wanted to talk a little bit more about this role of language and the role of language in healing, for example, and in doing spiritual work, because we're already very familiar with the idea that we are bioenergetic fields, and our energetic fields extend beyond merely our physical body. They extend into an intersubjective space, as it were. Like, you take a crowd or a group of people, energy fields are intermixing, and realistically, like they do at any distance. So we're already familiar with that idea. And I would just add here that language works in a similar way, because literally we're talking about discourse, which is a kind of circulation amongst the common. It's an intersubjective interface or edifice that we're all working with. So even as speech, language is not merely just my own personal expression. I'm drawing on very ancient traditions. I'm drawing on immediate cultural contexts. More deeply than that, though, the space of direct dialogue and direct presence that you can get in dialogue in a way that you can't in the same way with like asynchronous forms of communication. This kind of direct presence that is opened up is really an amplified space for the co-creation of new realities. So you can, of course, do this to a certain extent on your own, but it's really amplified if you can get the right kind of intersubjective space cleared. And so much of the work of language in the really good examples here, they're doing that work. They're clearing a space. They're making a clearing for higher truths to come through. And you can definitely see this in like the history of discussions on language, the history of the philosophy of language. So language is really its own type of body. It's an intersubjective body, just like these energy fields. Language really produces its own kind of energy fields, particularly in the way it intersects with our thought forms and the thought forms that we can then share amongst each other. So there's a real responsibility with language too. And the other side of this point or intuition that I'm trying to bring through is that, we often speak of doing our inner work. And I guess when it comes to language, it's not solely a matter of being inner. Language is a bridge between the inner and the outer. It's literally the intersubjective edifice that we're working with. And it determines much of our thought as well. Even as thought goes well beyond language, like language is not the medium of thought. There are other ways that thought can express itself and come through. Once it's intersubjective, once it's on the written page, once it's spoken, there is kind of a public intersubjective element to language, which then does carries this responsibility of engendering or connecting with certain thought forms rather than other ones. And so my point in sharing of this is, well, it's multifold, but for example, we're talking about our gifts here, right? And how to develop our gifts, right? That's why I wrote this guidebook. That's what I've been focused on. And particularly in relation to being on our own spiritual path and wanting to make a greater spiritual contribution, healing and doing spiritual work doesn't always look like, Reiki or channeling past life messages and so on. Spiritual work includes the kind of work that we're already doing with language. But let's face it, this is also a very small subset of people who are working in this area, because there are different functions and levels of language too. You can be using it on a very mundane kind of level, a profane level, I guess we would say, or even just using it as a tool, or even like lower down than that, just like completely automating it. But our language is a sacred technology. It goes back far and it runs deep. And this is also a living entity. It is a living intersubjective edifice, and it has its own energetic field, its own energetic body, as it were. And again, maybe this is related to, like, I'm calling myself a clairlinguist the more that I have tuned into this, or maybe clairlingual is more accurate word. But so our human linguistic inheritance across all languages also is, it's like a living species, just like different animal species or plant species. This is part of the organic earth, and our linguistic heritage is also such an organic expression. So it has its own energetic fields, and some of us are here as stewards of that kind of inheritance. And so this is a really deep topic. I don't expect that anyone will fully understand this just from like the one or two videos that I have on this now, but I'm just drawing on a really deep synthesis that I have based on like what I've studied, and probably it's what I've experienced in other incarnations, or maybe it's like concurrent dimensional versions of myself. But I just bring this up because it's an example of accepting and acknowledging and knowing which of our gifts to really develop, what we're meant to develop on a higher transpersonal level. So, for example, and I talk about this in the guide that I wrote, you may come into this life with some obvious strengths and skills, and those are not necessarily what you're meant to develop further. They may become important context, they may become important components in what you're meant to kind of unfold, but be really open to the other ways in which you're being called, because you may be called into new directions that require you to develop other aspects that maybe you felt were still weaknesses, or you were very aware that, maybe you feel more timid in a certain area. When we speak and we speak to each other, we are sharing in this kind of intersubjective energetic body. We are contributing to this organic, intersubjective living entity. And, healing works on that level too. Healing is needed in that space and on that register too. And so, just to wrap this up, I feel like this is also part of, or an example of like a place or an area where I'm giving myself a lot of grace, because I'm really integrating a new level here. Like, I'm integrating a new intersection that is, I'm not going to say it's never been discussed, but it's extremely not very much discussed. Not very much. Like, you've got to dig, you've got to hunt. There's going to be like 3 people who have maybe touched on this. And so it could look like that for you too. Like, if it feels really difficult or hazy, or if it feels like it's an area where you have to spend a lot of time justifying yourself, this could be because you are bringing in a new integration that goes beyond the status quo for whatever that context or field is that you're working with. And even when I think about it now, like, I think about some of the larger writing projects that I've been in. I've been like the sole author on. A lot of the energy, I was putting a lot of energy into kind of just justifying the place of possibility for having like the specific discussion that I was having, which is in some sense what I'm doing right now, because I'm also trying to share the point about how it's done. And here's the other way, or one other way in which this type of direct dialogue, this type of direct speaking also acts on a healing level, because not only is there entrainment or resonance between individuals on an intersubjective level, but there's also a level of resonance that you create and tap into and modulate for yourself between the speaking and thinking and feeling functions. And so, just even in speaking to you right now, although this is asynchronous, on a personal level, I'm tapping into more of my own resonance with regards to my own thinking and feeling and speaking centers, which is precisely why I'm gonna like leave in all of these gaps and like circular thoughts, because it is an authentic living trace of that process. And so this is just me exploring like this one little aspect. But I'm sharing it precisely because this is also intersubjective. It can become intersubjective, and then you will be able to enter into this space also. So there's so many aspects here that we normally take as just obvious, but they're not. And where they are taken as obvious, they become instrumentalized and kind of like abstracted as mere tools, and then thought kind of there's a desiccating process. Thought kind of dries up and is no longer present as a living entity within circulated speech in that way. So, to boil this down to the main points I've tried to convey here, the first is that you're here to develop your creative gifts into higher transpersonal spiritual forms, which do real healing work on an intersubjective level. And that could take many forms. And it goes well beyond, for example, doing like mediumship readings or other activities that we may normally associate with spiritual concerns. The spiritual is just really, it's really the intersubjective level, it's the transpersonal level, it's the collective level. And with respect to healing and growth, that's the way that I'm understanding this. So I would also look specifically at whatever difficult area of integration you have noticed. If you've noticed a place of resistance, for example, you feel called towards a certain direction or bringing certain things together, but you've noticed a real place of resistance and you come up against a certain kind of block, a mental block. Just know that that's also a sign that you're kind of like in the vicinity now of, okay, you are meant to integrate in this area. You are meant to like anchor in a new formation, a new combination, a new association, a new framework. And that already is a spiritual gift. That is literally a spiritual offering to our collective inheritance. If you can do that, because others haven't been able to do that, because that's why it doesn't exist yet. So I hope some of this has been helpful or insightful. Let me know, drop a comment down below with what kinds of resistance you're working with. And do check out the guide that I've written. I link to it below. It's also in the About section. And yeah, let me know if I can help you through part of this process. You'll see how to get in touch with me. And yeah, I really look forward to hearing from you guys. Thanks so much.